Mate, good to see you.
The inevitable song.
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Listen, you can't stay away from this place, can you?
Melbourne? No, I love it. It's
And
cold though.
It's cold. Yesterday, had
I
you been
brought
here
a
yesterday?
T-shirt. I mean, you know, I thought I was getting out of the British spring, and I end up in the Australian winter. You know,
Now you're pretty new to microphones. You may have to use that a bit closer, Bob.
Really?
Where you are.
Okay.
I was just thinking in terms of Melbourne. If you were really lucky Irishman, you might have been born an Australian. That knocked you out, didn't it? Do you have any Irish relatives? Do you have any aunts or uncles who came out here as priests or nuns?
No.
No connection.
No, us lot, we're sort of a mini Australia ourselves in Dublin. My granddad was Belgian Catholic. My grandma was English Jewish. My other granddad was German Protestant. And my other grandma was Irish nothing. I got the Irish nothing.
Well, now you've talked about luck. Now you've reached 70 and a bit.
Yeah.
Do you care about growing old?
I don't think I do, but my dad lived to 96 until a couple of years ago, and my auntie died on New Year's Day this year. His sister, she was 106, and they hated it, and they just didn't, you know, at 93 my dad was just fed up. We were actually just talking about it backstage, and he just said, you know, what's the point? And I know you had somebody on talking about immortality.
Yeah.
Why? You know, I mean, really, I mean, you certainly, as the pop song says, don't want to live forever. And I understand the logic that they can understand the process of aging now and probably retard it and that, but that would be a disaster, I think, for society and for everything else if we're able to extend our lives way into the future. At 93, my father had nothing left really to say or contribute, so the purpose of life had gone. He was healthy enough. At 103, Auntie Fifi went off to another place, neither dead nor alive, and stayed there for 3 years. But she wanted out too. You know, there comes a point where you're just tired and bored and fed up and having to grin at the great-great-grandchildren whose names you don't know and who you couldn't give a fuck about. You know?
Well, you've been widely respected. You've been loved.
Except by you.
Except by me. Yeah. And you have, I would say, that you've made a significant difference. Have you had a fortunate life up to now?
I mean, given the cards that you're dealt with at the beginning, and this is true, I'm sure, for given that who you people are, yes, I suppose, yeah, I mean, it's been interesting, and that's all I ever really required. And somebody asked me once, you know, what did I think my last words would be? And I thought for a moment, and I think that, you know, it would be, that was interesting.
That was it. It's on the gravestone, that was interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. To grab a stereotype, I mean, Irish are supposed to be uncontrollable dreamers. Are you a dreamer? Were you?
No, because I don't believe in dreaming is for people who are asleep. Wake up.
All right, but here you are. I'm awake, Bob. I'm awake. I promise. But you're an Irish punk rocker, and you think you can save the world. That's got to be a dream.
No, I don't think I could save the world. I mean, when you do, I mean, for people who don't know, I didn't dream my way into pop music. I fell into it, and once I was in it, I sort of chose a route that I thought would work for us, me and my mates. And that worked out, and it requires, you know, a certain amount of talent, a certain amount of timing, a certain amount of luck, but an awful lot of work. And that's true of literally everything. And then you get to, on the very first interview we ever did with a music paper called the New Musical Express in the UK, 1976. It was the punk period, and punk was an attitude, and the attitude came about because of the economic realities of that time in that part of the world. England had run into an economic brick wall. The unions were walking in and out of Downing Street and dictating terms. There was nowhere to go, and if you were a child and you left school, there was no future, as Johnny Rotten of the Sex Pistols famously wrote, there is no future in England's dreaming. And it's a wonderful line, and it's pithy and accurate. And with the venom that went behind its expression, that was a true summing up of the period. Now in Ireland, we had the same economy, but we were quite used to a zero economy, which is the ultimate treason of a government that it can't provide a future for its children. But we always had the escape route of emigration, hence 40% of all Australians come from Irish and 40% of all Americans come directly from the Irish. Why? Because we had to get out. It's too small a country and you just can't sustain it. So I come of age with my mates, and there's nothing for us. Now in my case, I did very badly in school and I didn't go to university and I didn't want to. So I was trying to get any job, but there was closed shops, there was no casual labor to be had, so immediately I had to go to England. And I began writing these things that turned out to be songs while I worked in an abattoir. That became our first #1.
You worked in an abattoir?
I worked in the slaughterhouse, yeah, in order to get money to go to Canada to work in the gold mines in the Arctic. That was the plan. And because I could drive heavy equipment, I'd driven heavy equipment building the roads in the UK. And they needed this specific skill in the Arctic, in the open cast gold mines. And the money was immense. And I thought, I'll make my stash and then I'll decide where I can go with this. But meanwhile, back at home, you really had what I later described in a cliche as a banana republic. You had a civil war, though people refer to it as the Troubles, as if it was some minor headache, but 3,200 people being murdered is a war. You had a church-state compact. The government was utterly corrupt. They were sending guns up to the killers in the north. The church was silent about this, and the priests who weren't busy fucking the children of their parishioners were busy giving succor to the killers. And you'd watch this, and you understood that there was really a deep cancer at the heart of this country. And there was this awful silence.
A deep cancer?
Yeah, there was. And there was this, we all knew it. We all had friends who were at the Christian Brothers schools who were being abused. The police just beat you up with impunity. Really just beat you up. You'd be taken in and beaten up. The government were wholly corrupt, we knew it. Business people were in cahoots with this corruption. The church was silent about it, and we all shut up. And it was what I describe as this claustrophobia of silence, if you can use that expression. And it was awful. It was terrible. And it was deeply corrosive to us. Now, one of the few advantages of Age Ray is that sometimes you're proved right. And when it came good for Ireland finally, we had these tribunals based on the South African model.
Truth and reconciliation.
Yeah, where we looked at what happened in the north, we looked at the government corruption, we looked at the church, and found all those things that generation of children began singing and talking about to be true. So we all have this, Asher, isn't a great view of Ireland? Well, no, it was crap. And of course, like any country, it still has problems, but particularly then it was awful. And I found a vehicle for talking about this. It was called rock and roll. So when it came time to do an interview, they asked me what I wanted to get out of pop music. Now, the whole thing about the punks was, it doesn't matter what they tell you, that you're useless, that you can't have a job, that you can't play music. Just pick up a guitar or a drum and make a noise, because that will work. And a whole generation did that. But they were all saying, yeah, we're against this, we're against. So I said, well, I want to get 3 things out of it. I want to get rich, famous, and laid. And
In which order?
any of those, you know, I mean, Catholic Ireland trying to get shagged was impossible, you know. So we'd grown, and my dad sold towels around the countryside of Ireland, so there was no money. And the fame.
But what did your dad think of you in music? Was that a layabout?
We didn't get on. My mum died when I was 7 or 8. He went away on Monday, came back Friday, so me and my 2 sisters sort of brought ourselves up.
But he was selling towels, right?
Yeah, and he spent
salesman?
whatever money he could on trying to get us a decent education. Okay. And I wouldn't play ball. And so this poor guy really stretched beyond limits. I mean, the love of his life had died. He was left with 3 young children. He had to go away, the guilt of that, all of that. And here was the son in whom all the, you know, promise of the future was, you know, just wasn't playing ball. And we had a terrible rupture. And I was interested in whole other things. I was interested not in the world he had. And I think it's the essence. Again, I refer to the audience. I'm sure a lot of you came from absolutely nothing and invented a universe, an own universe within which you can function. And I think that's the essence of the entrepreneur. If you think about Churchill, Branson, any of these world-famous entrepreneurs, they were hopeless in school. They didn't quite know what they were supposed to do. They couldn't function with this. I mean, Richard is very uncomfortable in a social context. So they invented their own universe within which they could function. There's another Irish skeptic, George Bernard Shaw, who said, the world, all change in the world comes through the power of unreasonable people. The reasonable man adapts himself to the world. The unreasonable persists in adapting the world to himself. And I think that's it. You're forced into a situation. So when they said, well, why do you want to be famous? Because this was anathema to the punk ethic. And I said, because I want to use the platform it gives me to talk about the things that bother me. And that was before we sort of made it. And I did get shagged a lot. And it was everything I hoped for.
and you became famous.
And in fact, I recognize some of you girls here tonight. So, yeah. Thanks a lot for showing up again and remembering.
You said you wanted to make money, but was money something evil when you were this?
No, money wasn't. It wasn't the thing. I don't think any musician goes into it with the intent of making cash. They go into it because I don't think the Beatles thought they were going to make money, or Elvis thought they were going to make money, or the Rolling Stones. It came because it became the lingua franca of the planet, and that happened because there was mass communication through transistors. And so, you know, the revenues from all over the world have been able to play all over the world. That made them wealthy, but it was never the end object. But for me, I was never going back, and I will never go back, and there's a deep fear.
You mean back to poverty?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
there really is a fear, if I think about it, of going back to that. I just had to get out. And so I would do whatever, go to the Arctic Circle, drive machines, for however many years it took me to get enough money, which was my escape route. So I could then have the freedom to look around and choose what it was I could possibly do with whatever this stuff allowed me.
And do you find now, on the board of 12 companies or so, that making money's easy?
I still, in my head, I think it's difficult in my head. But at this stage of my life, I'm always, so you go out with your mates and you pick up the bill, and there's a profound pleasure in that, because I'm thinking, I can afford to do this. And there's sort of a relief washes through me, and I can well afford it. You know, I'm rich, but I have to keep saying to myself I am. It's pathetic. I'm a fucking idiot. But, yeah, it's really strange. And anyway, there's enough there now to see me and the kids and the missus through to the end. And so, and of course, as you get older and your cumulative life allows you to get more money and you get jobs because you've proved yourself in a certain way, therefore you get paid more, etc. But I don't work really for the money. In the end, having said all of that, in the end, what I've understood, what really energizes me is the realization of an idea. And I'll give you an example. When I was thrown out of Canada because I was an illegal immigrant, and I went back to Ireland, and with the money I'd saved, I started a paper. And the ban then happened, and I was left with the choice of this boring small ads paper, like an offline eBay sort of thing. And I was left with the choice of that, which I thought would work, or excellent sex, magnificent drugs, and people screaming at you, and let me think, you know. So I went down that route. Many years later, I was visiting my dad in hospital, and there was this vast number of papers stacked up in the lobby of the hotel, and I picked one up, and it was the paper that I was starting. And the guy who continued with it sold it for £32 million about 10 years ago. And I don't know how it may have been the printer where I just left the artwork and just abandoned it and went and did the band. He may have picked up with it and ran with it. But I absolutely didn't care that he'd run with this, or I was going to call him and say, hey, that's my artwork, I still own it, I want a piece of this, I'm suing you. Absolutely not. What the pleasure was, I knew that would work. I just knew it would work. So it's the realization of those things that ultimately is the satisfaction.
And do you shake your head when you think of the kid who was determined not to be poor, when you come up, as you did recently, with, as a venture capitalist, 300 million quid? Do you
Dollars.
shake your head, dollars? Do you shake your head and wonder how that happened?
What I shake my head about is that I find it interesting, because I never would have thought it. So when I said the cumulative life, and again, I'm sure it happens to everyone, so your cumulative experience leads you into things. And certainly in my job, this must be the greatest networking opportunity in the planet. So if I was to hang out here for a while, you know, there'd be people coming and there'd be ideas exchanged, and I'd say, why don't I give you a call? Or they'd say, let me give you a call, Bob. And something happens, and I generally take the road less traveled.
So you could be a young president, couldn't you?
Well, I'm not old enough to be a young president, you know, so. Young? You know, what's wrong with you people? You're fucking ancient, you know. It is that, you know, the private equity thing happened because I was talking to, I was in China talking to the clients of CLSA, who are the biggest brokers in China. They were owned by Société Générale in France, and Crédit Agricole in France, and some Americans. The Chinese have now bought them. And they were investment bankers and brokers. And they had their clients there, and I did my thing, and I was talking about the opportunity of Africa. Why was everyone crawling on their belly to the golden gleam of China when China was in Africa? Why not look there? And afterwards, a lot of these wealth managers and PE guys and VC guys came to me and said, if we put a group together, will you take us through Africa and show us what you're talking about? And I said, no, that's not my job. That's your job. It's other people's money. You're supposed to at least go and kick the tires, you know, and find out what's going on. And then at the more select private dinner, the higher echelon clients of CLSA said, look, Bob, seriously, we are very interested. In fact, we've asked Rob, who's the chairman, to ask you to put together a PE fund. And I said, but really, I really don't understand finance, and I don't understand it because I've no interest in it. And Rob Morrison said, we'll put in 5 million now, start the fund, and the guy who was the CEO of Europe, Phil Pritchard. So to get out of this situation, I just turned to Pritchard, who I only knew from the flight over, but thought he was a cool guy. I just said, if he gives up his job, millions a year, and you give me the 5 million, I'll do it. And Pritchard said, yeah, I'm fed up doing this bloody job, I'll go with you.
So you're locked in. You're locked in.
Thanks, Phil. And neither of us knew what PE was, and we set about finding somebody who did. And he then put together the team. It's all African, but they're all guys who are working in Boston Consulting or Standard Chartered or in other PE firms, you know, a Doctor of Engineering from Imperial College, Harvard, etc. And really they wanted to take their skills back, but they didn't want to lose the income that they were getting there, but they take a risk with this PE fund. So it's all African, and you know, it's the last bit, I say, of Bob's big adventure in Africa from 1984, when you saw these emaciated scraps of humanity, to those people now requiring jobs in the fastest growing economies in the planet. And so I just thought, well, okay, we'll show people what I've been talking about for years. This is the go place. And these people are eminently capable, intelligent, sentient, ready for off. And we've bought some amazing companies. I mean, seriously, just ridiculous. And
so are you comfortable making big profits out of Africa?
I'm very comfortable making it for other people to prove the model, because it's other people's money invested. I actually won't make much out of this, and I tell you straight away if I was, so you know, I've no embarrassment about that. If we get into Fund 2, I'll end up making a decent bit of money, but I can make more money than that doing other stuff. But I find it fun.
Go on.
And it's that thing, like, you know, once you understand the code of another industry, once you understand its language, like, and its acronyms and that, then it isn't daunting. It's quite simple. Well, you know, the professionals go and find the right deals to do. The professionals kick the tires and do the due diligence. The professionals get to know the boards and the managers and the staff of these companies. So that's not me. I'm the chair of it. But where I want to go and what I want to do with this, then I guide it.
But you're still talking poverty.
No, you're completely talking about poverty, and you're talking about the route out of poverty. And the route out of poverty, as we all know, is through trade. I mean, the great triumph so far of our century is China pulling 400 million people out of extreme poverty. That is exceptional. And of course, the great challenge to the Chinese is pulling the remaining 800 million, far more than the continent of Africa, extremely poor people out of poverty. In fact, that's what the party is entirely focused on. So as everyone freaks out about them moving in down south and all that, yes, that's they're you know, feeling their way into being a big power, but they're obsessed with getting their own country into a median level economy. Right now, what's the average income in China is about $8,500 a year. In America, it's $52,500. So they need to get somewhere up there. So, you know, we do know that's the way out. We do know that 7 of the top 10 fastest growing economies in the planet right now are African.
Yeah. So when you talk poverty, you talk economy and politics.
Well, what I talk about is the thing we talked about all those years ago, that poverty is hugely unnecessary, just ridiculously unnecessary. It's against our self-interest. I'll explain that. You know, we will always have people who are wealthy. We'll always have people who are poorer than that, a relative poverty. But this extreme poverty where life offers you nothing, that is very dangerous to us. We see that the wellspring of nearly every single global problem right now, the wellspring of it is poverty. And I include everything. Terrorism, self-evidently. As soon as people had this thing we all have in our pockets, where we could talk to each other, and we began to be able to hear their voices for the first time, they were saying deeply uncomfortable things to us in a language we simply didn't understand. And we'd be going, democracy and human rights, we've been talking about this for 50 years. They're going, that's not us, or we don't want that, or we don't believe in that. What you say are universal laws, in fact, are parochial concerns. So here's what we think. And we're going, what? Well, we'll just bomb you into what we believe is right, or, you know, we'll try and bribe you into what is right, or we'll coerce you into it. And they're going, really, I don't think so. If you're a young man, specifically a young man, and you can't attain status, you can't find a purpose in life, and you have no voice because you've no elective government, you pick up a stone, and if there's a sword, you'll take a sword. And if there's an AK-47, you'll take that. Now, this is not an excuse for those murderous, medieval, death cultist thugs that we see. But it is what's happening in huge parts of the world. And nuclear proliferation is the same. If you're a ridiculous country like North Korea, and you don't want to be pushed into something you don't, then you get the bomb. Because you're poor, you've got nothing else to offer except the crudest of power. Nuclear proliferation. If a terrorist gets their hand on a dirty bomb, climate change, while China powers itself into being a medium-level economy, it requires the use of Australian resources at least, and plenty of African resources, which is the mother lode of all resources in the planet. So climate change derives from poverty, and yet the poor contribute the least to climate change, while the wealthiest contribute the most. So that needs to be ameliorated. All of these spring from a preposterous way that we've structured the world. Globalization exacerbated that. There were benefits and there were negatives, but we really never understood what those negatives would be. And this version of globalization happened from about, I suppose, 1989, and exploded in a welter of corruption that bankrupted countries, tens and thousands of millions of people, Greece, Italy, Portugal, Spain. And fraud was perpetrated on the, and Ireland, fraud was perpetrated on the planet. Fraud, outright criminal fraud, was perpetrated on the planet by the banks. Fraud, LIBOR, interbank lending rate, fraud. The gold price, fraud. Currency pricing, fraud. Mortgage pricing, fraud. Fraud. No one's gone to jail. So these things we put upon ourselves, whereas if you bring the poor up so they produce, then we will buy their stuff. That's how we got out of this madness. That's how we got out of the recession, because the Chinese were pumping out the cheap stuff they needed to build their economy, and we needed cheap stuff to buy because we'd no money left. Subprime, the poor, just throwing money at the poor for the ridiculous houses that had no value. It collapsed us, and the poor saved us again. I know this sounds bien pensant, I know it sounds hippie and liberal. It's not. If the poor can produce and we can buy their stuff, they get cash. What do they do with the cash? They buy our stuff. You know, you don't need a PhD in economics. It works. It's been proven over and over again. So why do we allow the running sore? Why do we assault ourselves every night by this stuff on television which shows people unable to eat in a world of surplus? Dying on our television screens. That is economically illiterate, intellectually absurd, and morally repulsive. So why?
These days, the Irish punk rock singer can now ring up Angela Merkel or Henry Kissinger or a president or a prime minister. Are you optimistic about our future or pessimistic?
No, I'm not optimistic. I mean, you know, you can see that the way I talk and react, the punk is still present. And I talk very frankly.
Please don't lose it.
No, I mean, you know, I talk very frankly with, though I may like them as people. Angela Merkel is a very nice woman, as you'd imagine. And, you know, it would be a pleasure to go and have a cup of tea or a dinner with her as a person. But when I meet the Chancellor of Germany and you're the poverty activist, then you've got half an hour. You're so lucky, you're so privileged to have that half hour with this very powerful person. And you make your point, and she's really good to deal with because she's extremely direct. And you need to know where you are. She'll say, Bob, I'm not going to do that. And then you seek to persuade, and then you're not getting anywhere, so you kind of threaten. in a diplomatic way, you know.
What are your threat, Bob?
The threat would be that, you know, we command a large constituency, and I can get on.
You mean you and Bono and people like that?
Our fellow travellers, and you know, you can go on telly and you can talk about these things, and you can say your Chancellor made 4 speeches this year, this year, this year. She said she would do this. When she says these things, when the President, when the Prime Minister says these things and signs a document, they are not signing their personal name, Angela Merkel, David Cameron, Barack Obama. They are signing the honour of the people of Germany or the United Kingdom or Australia or wherever. That's what they're doing. And to break that honour, particularly to the poorest people of the planet, from some of the wealthiest, is shameful. So if they're going to lie about this, why would you possibly vote for them? That's a pretty powerful, you know, I believe it, and I believe it to be so. Now, you don't do it very often. Most people say there's Geldof crapping on about, yawned, go away. But it has some impact. And by and large, the British have been immense on this whole thing, from Blair through Brown to Cameron.
You mean immensely supportive?
Yes, I mean, they achieved 3 weeks ago what was promised to the poor. We gave ourselves this elegant gift in 2000. The UN decided to eliminate extreme poverty by 50% by 2015, this year. Why 50%? Because they believed it was doable if the advanced economies gave 0.7% of their economies in international aid. So 0.7, it's tiny. Britain achieved that of the G8 economies 3 weeks ago. Not only achieved it, well, they achieved it last year, but 3 weeks ago they enshrined it in law that no matter what government or what the economic condition of Britain, 0.7% would go to the poor. That is not only fantastic politics, you know, it was promised as a platform across the spectrum, across the political spectrum, and against the right wing of the Conservative Party and the right wing press, who argued a good argument that this was ridiculous and unnecessary, but there were counter arguments which were just as persuasive, and all the political parties brought their constituencies home on this. In the House of Lords, it was vehemently argued against, but wasn't thrown out and passed into law. In the same 2 weeks ago, Britain made a fisheries exclusion zone, 325,000 miles of exclusion zone around the Pitcairn and Norfolk Islands in the Pacific, so the fish there could recuperate from the overfishing. So these are straws in the wind. The Germans are at 0.3, but promised to be 0.7 by 2015, as did a load of other people. The Americans didn't, because 0.7% of the American economy is vast, and you just simply can't spend that amount of money. So they opted out of that one. Did we achieve the Millennium Development Goals? Did we actually cut poverty by 50%? Yes. I think that's amazing. Yeah.
What was it about the Irish punk rock music experience that gave you this expertise?
Punk was always a political thing, as I explained. I mean...
But you said no education, no Harvard, no nothing, and here you are spouting...
Yes, but I mean, I just didn't cooperate in school. I mean, at 13... Look, this is boring. When you're at home and there's no one there, and there's no money, so there's no phone, there's no fridge, there's no telly, but there is a radio. I just take books out of the school library. There's no one to make you do your homework at home. So I just read and turn on the radio. And there was one rock and roll station, those of you from the UK and my generation will remember. It came from the most unlikely of tax-dodging micro-states, Luxembourg, and Radio Luxembourg played rock and roll. And life was not good, and I was alert to the possibilities that these young men that we all know at the time, Mick Jagger, John Lennon, Pete Townsend, Bob Dylan, they talked about whole other universes of possibility. They talked about change, the need for change, the desirability of change, the inevitability of change, and the rhetoric they gave you to articulate that change was rock and roll. And the platform for that change clearly was rock and roll. At least that's what I took it to be. And I was reading at the time a category of literature that I suppose you could describe as the romance of poverty, except poverty is not romantic at all. It is debasing. And I was reading Steinbeck, Dickens, the great Chicago journalist Studs Terkel, Woody Guthrie. And because Dylan was reading James Baldwin, I started reading James Baldwin. I was reading about South Africa for the first time. And look, I know this sounds ludicrous, but I couldn't quite understand what the book was about because I couldn't understand, I genuinely couldn't understand why you could be dehumanized, why you could be delegitimized, why you could be put upon and put down and beaten up because you had a surface spurious difference, like they didn't like your clothes, or you had red hair, or you had a beard, or you supported Chelsea and not Man U, or your skin color was black. Something as artificial and spurious as that. How could that be? And I couldn't get it. So the South African rugby team...
Didn't you live that in Ireland?
No, there was no black people in Ireland, so I didn't quite understand the fear of the stranger, which is the base of racism. Yeah. But I still couldn't get my head around it, you know, the idea. Now, we were brought up, of course, by the Catholic priest who'd returned from the missions, and these were rural boys from deep rural poverty in Ireland. I mean Dickensian poverty in Ireland, from the rural side. And suddenly, you know, a free education happened. If you had the vocation, oh my God, Ray, you should have a fucking vocation, you know. Join the church, be a priest. It's a man's world out there, you know. And, but it was for them, and they led this thin seminarian life where it was the first time they were exposed to ideas. And then they were shipped off to Africa. And of course, for these boys, here was this psychedelic world. Here they were in their woolen soutanes in this boiling heat, you know, and these people who are deeply spiritual, far more spiritual than Ireland or their religion. And so it exploded their heads. And they'd come back to Ireland with malaria or ill or something, and they'd be talking, if you could divert them from mathematics and Latin and French, you could get them going on about this wondrous place that they'd been exposed to. So in fact, Africa had converted them, and they go on about it. And so I suppose I was brought up with that. But myself and a guy called Mick Foley, we started anti-apartheid when I was 14, mainly to stop the South Africans coming to Ireland and playing rugby and beating the shit out of us, you know. But as opposed to your boasting about cricket, of course, Ireland did win the Rugby Grand Slam at the weekend against all comers in the north.
And you actually said in your book that you were bullied at school because you were a lousy rugby player.
I wasn't bullied, I just didn't cooperate, you know. Okay. I mean, I immediately developed asthma, you know, as soon as...
Bobby, if you Google Bob Geldof, it says musician, entrepreneur, philanthropist, businessman. When you fill one of those immigration forms out that says occupation, what do you say?
Musician.
Musician. Mm. Do you envy Mick Jagger and the boys at 70 plus doing these mammoth world tours?
No, but when I get actually to the customs point, they go, musician? Are you sure? You know? No, because I do the world tour thing, you know. It's not at that level, but...
How much are you playing these days?
I'm doing 30 festivals this summer.
And did you say music is for your soul?
Music is everything. You know, it just fully occupies my head when I'm in that space. I mean, I write tunes, I can't stop it. You know, it somehow experience prases itself into lyrics, but that hasn't altered. Like I said to you, I wrote my first #1 when I was working in a slaughterhouse, but I didn't know I was doing that, and I still don't know. Like, you know, if I go, back to the hotel now and write "what a bastard," it'll probably be because I was talking to you, but I won't know that, you know. And,
No, you've written that before.
you know, yeah, that was number 56, I think, Ray. You didn't really make it. No, that still goes on, and like it's utterly cathartic, you know. I mean, my head doesn't stop. And but when
What's
I'm
it do to you, though? I mean, if you go back to the hotel and start to write a tune in your head, is it therapy? Does that make you feel
No,
good?
not the writing of it. That's frustrating because you think you say it's okay, here's some idea, let me quickly write it down. And then you get back and you noodle around on the guitar and you just chuck it because it's rubbish. You know, and you chuck so many of them because they're not there. But when you nail it, when you really
And you know it?
get it, you tend to know it because you need to drift free. Your mind needs to not be conscious. A good song is like a self-addressed postcard from your psyche. And, you know, all this stuff comes at you, as it does with everyone. And the important bits seem to filter down into some deep place in your brain. And then when you're wandering free, if it's late at night and you're a bit depressed, that seems to work for me, then it spits itself out into your foreconscious. And you grab it because it means something. I don't know what it is, but it means something. You grab it and you write it quickly. And then it's like a loose thread of a pullover. You pull it and the entire thing unravels. Sometimes very slowly, but sometimes instantly. And then you've got it. And there is nothing as satisfying as hearing it at the end. And it might be out of tune, or it might be this, but you stop, leave it, that's it.
Really?
And you're just listening back to something that is utterly true to you. And so that's why people say it doesn't matter what the critics say. That's true. It doesn't matter. It hurts you because they don't get it. But it's whatever's going on coming out of those speakers. I don't know why. I don't understand it. But it's true. And then to perform that, to get lost in that, to not be yourself, to be utterly removed from the self, to float free for just 2 hours, is beyond cathartic. It is exhausting physically. It is emotionally liberating.
So beyond the sex and the money and the drugs, it's something creative that
Well, you're so pumped up anyway, you don't really require the drugs, but you do need to get shagged. And, and you know, it's a consequence of it, you know, and but it would happen anyway, I mean, you know. But no, I love it, and I'm just lucky it turned out that this square peg fitted that round hole.
Yes. You don't have to make the choice, thankfully, but what you're saying is that you'd give up the money, you'd give up
Yes, I would.
everything for the music.
I would. There's just no question in my mind. And I, you know, if we didn't make money and we had many, many hits, and we played the big gigs, and I'd still, if I could, be still in the band if none of that had happened, because from get-go, it was, you know, the cliche, it was coming home to something that I'd never understood that I could do or that I'd want to do. It just happened one night. I went to the pub early and 2 guys were talking about starting a band. That's it.
And that was it. But the smell of the grease paint, the roar of the crowd, that sort of stuff is all part of the magic?
Yeah, it is. I mean, it isn't necessarily the big crowds. We've done that, the biggest. But if you were in a room and the room fits 100 people and it's packed,
Yeah.
if there's 10 people, you know, if it's half full, you feel a bit, I don't know why though, but if it's packed, it may as well be the biggest stadium in the world. Seriously, the same thing happens to you in your head. You're just lost in this thing and committed to it. And I don't know why you need an audience. I guess it's like, you know, what's the point of being Picasso if nobody sees the painting? Yeah. You know, I mean, you know, you go home this afternoon and you start noodling on the guitar and you go, hold on a minute. This could just be the greatest song ever written in the history of music. And fuck me, it is the greatest song ever written. And you put the guitar away and no one ever hears it. What's the point? It requires an audience. It requires to be heard and felt.
All right, it's a fascinating journey. You've come halfway around the world to talk to us here.
And as you said, you've got an extraordinary audience here of men and women. What's the message?
Well, I don't think there is a message. I mean, you know, when I was talking about I know about YPO for years. For many years, I thought it was a song by the Village People. It's fun to stay at the YPO. You know? You know, I think at the end of the conference, guys, we should all just get up and do the YPO song. You can be the Indian. It's a very powerful potential, this thing. I know you do lots of good stuff. I talk every year at this conference called One Young World, which sounds pretty naff, but it's not at all. It's I did it the first year under sufferance for a friend, and then I realized how potentially powerful this thing was. And it's younger people, much younger than the YPO, from about 19 to 28. And they're nominated by their peers from each country in the world. And then the organizers get sponsors for these people to come. Last year it was Dublin, this year it's Bangkok. Cities now bid for this thing. And these people are profoundly serious people. And they task each other now with doing things. They come with the problems of their country or universal problems, and they task each other with doing, they help each other and support each other, which is of course viable now through social media. And they achieve immense things. You guys are actually very powerful people. I know that you run businesses, but beyond that as a collective group. And I think we need to now be very careful in the world. I talked about my Auntie Fifi dying New Year's Day this year at 106. When she was 103 and before she tripped out on her own genetic drug, I asked her about the First World War. I think the word celebrate is wrong, whose anniversary we had last year. And about 3 weeks ago, I was in Belgium, talking in Brussels. And down the road, half an hour down the road from Brussels, of course, is the battlefield of Waterloo, which was the culmination of maybe the First World War. Even Australia was affected. They had to take in many Napoleonic prisoners. 5 million people died in the Napoleonic Wars. 5 million. I mean, we never think about that. We just think of the glamour of the Napoleonic years. More people died that afternoon at Waterloo than the average week at the Battle of the Somme in the First World War. I mean, why we do these things to each other, I don't know. What derives from these events? So I asked my Auntie Fifi about the Geldofs in the First World War. And why I asked her was because my granddad escaped the bullet. He came from the Somme. He came from Ypres, the epicenter of the Battle of the Somme. And on the Menin Gate, which memorializes that battle, there are many Geldofs there, people who died in that fight. And Auntie Fifi was young in 1913, but I said, was there any sense that there was something coming? Because I remembered being young in the Cuban Missile Crisis, and I remembered this great sense of trepidation in the Geldof family, and my dad listening closely to the radio, intently, like he never did. I remembered the priests running up and down the aisles of the study hall and whispering to each other and being afraid of that. And I said to Dad, you know, what's happening? And he said to me, there may be a war. And I said, what's going to happen? He said, that will be it. And of course I said, when? And he said, tomorrow. And I mean, I hear you laughing, it sounds bizarre, but it was tomorrow. It was going to be, they either pull back, the Soviets, or the ships would be stopped. And then everything was up for grabs. So I asked Fifi about, was there a sense that something was coming? And she said, no, like she doesn't remember that at all. And her memory now is going way back, as you do when you're old. It was becoming very clear. She said, no, it was out of the blue. Out of the blue came this global suicide, this mass cultural murder. Why? Who is to blame? Literally no one is to blame for the First World War. It was just like we got maddened with tension and we needed some terrible bloodlust to resolve what? Millions of young boys and girls gone.
Tens of millions.
Yeah. So now we're here, 100 years since the First War, 200 years since Waterloo. And I don't know about you guys. I lived through the Cold War. I was a member of the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament. It was successful. The nuclear test ban treaties, the START talks, all came out of that, us saying no. But I've never experienced the world more fractious, more vociferous, more troubled, more tense. And where's our Sarajevo? Is it Ukraine? Is it Syria? Is it Tunisia? Is it Yemen? Pakistan? Afghanistan? Is it the islands just off Vietnam? Where's our meaningless moment that triggers it all? And I think it's there, and I think we have to be very careful now. We all need to be fire watching. And we need our fire extinguishers to hand. And you see, the 21st century hasn't started yet. We're 15 years in. And everything is on the model of the 20th century, which was characterized by a murderous competition and will be remembered in history as the 75-year war. And if we're not careful, the 21st century will be the end one. You see this political criminal, Putin, threatening that they are the only country who can destroy the United States in 3 minutes. His closest advisor reiterated that threat 3 weeks ago. You see madness afoot. And you see people bemused by this and afraid by it, and a tension building and not being able to talk to each other, not finding a common language. So for you people, particularly you people, who run these grand businesses, who employ cumulatively tens of thousands of people, who have influence, then the message must be that there needs a newer compact, that this century cannot be defined by competition, rather cooperation, consensus, compromise. And we need to work to that, and we need to commit ourselves to that. No airy-fairy hippie bollocks, serious, standing back, being quiet, being still, and thinking. Because it seems to me the world is so serious, we just indulge ourselves in trivialities, trivialism. What are we using the most powerful invention ever in the history of mankind for? Cute cats and porn. We need to be deeply serious. For me, it takes the shape of dealing with people who are poor but shouldn't be, who are eminently talented, sentient, intelligent, capable, who can acquire purpose in their life and give us benefit and themselves thereof. That's what I do. What the YPO can do cumulatively is much more profound. And I suggest, if you leave this hall, that someone comes up with some idea that really focuses on what this century should turn out to be.
Thank you, mate. Through the sex, drugs, and rock and roll, there's a great clarity there, a great clarity, a lot of wisdom. I think I need a drink out that. But thank you for what you've done and what you do. Thanks for coming halfway around the world to talk to us, and the inspiration you provide as well. So would you please thank Bob Geldof?
Thanks, Ray.
Thanks, buddy. Very much.